So, follow up to the previous tariff video, right? Is crowdfunding dead? Are we seeing the dominoes fall? Almost on a daily basis since I've been posting and thinking about these, well, Reddit seems to have another sky is falling sort of post ritually. And so the question is it actually happening, right? Everybody wants to speculate. Let's pump the brakes a second, because there's one post we have to talk about that really caught my eye. And it's not the Board Game Wire Final Frontier situation. It's not the Underdog situation. It's not the Board Game Wire going after Simon and speculating there again. It's Bitewing. Very, very level-headed approach. So let me unwind it for you and why, again, we have to follow up on this. Let's go. I love this post because it takes all of the sky is falling out of the situation right now, because you've got a lot of people on a lot of sides of things saying a lot of different things. And so then you have a lot of interpretations of those things. What's the tariff percentage at? Where is it actually affecting things? Why are you able to do this and they can't do that? Why is one company folding and not another company? How concerned should we be that another one is going to happen even before I air this, between the time I'm filming it and it going live? Rest in peace, greater than games. Holy F-balls. Let's talk, right? Now, it's not, at the time of me filming this, the 245% that was speculated and, well, being shouted from the rooftops as an exaggerated response, because people, especially on Reddit, don't actually read the articles. They just react to the headlines. That is literally what Reddit is known for. It is a meme in the comment section nowadays. So it's not the case right now yet. However, the other big topic of interest at the same time, the big yelling in the comment section every single time, no matter where you are, no matter what social media, no matter what Board Game Geek forum, you have people going, well, you know what? This is actually really good because then you can just make all your stuff here. No, shut your pie hole. Shut your big yapper. You can't. It's already been quite extensively covered if you would actually get outside of whatever bubble you float in to do your own research. And that doesn't mean go to whatever your preferred media biased outlet, whatever is. It means go to somewhere or someone, personally speaking, because that's the other thing. You've got people attacking these subjects. You have people who are literally in the trenches dealing with it, telling you something else. But why would you actually believe someone who's dealing with it as opposed to the political party that you best align with? That's silly, Chris. That's ridiculous. No, you can't. The US has an absolute bare bones infrastructure. That's not me saying that. This is the 150 plus publishers who would love to be able to do this, folks. You think they love sending things over there and then having them have to come back and pay that additional cost if they didn't absolutely have to? Which also begs up the other thing. Well, you know what? We're just being abused by China and this trade deficit. Nope, stop. You are, again, parroting stuff you have heard, not that you have stuff you've actually seen or experienced. The factories over there, from many of the publishers, they're getting living wages. They're doing good stuff. This is not 40 years ago China in the same sense. Is it all the way it should be? Probably. No. Is their country perfect? Not by any means. Is our country perfect? No. Do we sometimes do things the way we shouldn't do them as well and kind of take advantage of stuff because that's the way our country is run, especially of these large businesses? Yeah, folks. Yeah, and that's not the people on the ground's problem. That's the people running some of the bigger stuff and making some of these decisions, whether it be in government or business. But that's a whole nother side tangent. They are literally, as the Bitewings post says, the leader in global manufacturing because they have spent the time and the energy and the money to build this up over decades. You can't do that in a shorter time frame than years. Now, the big question that we alluded to at the beginning. Final Frontier, they're done. Underdog, they're done. CMON, oh, they're swirled in the drain. They're no different. They're no different than when the stock exchange stuff was announced last month because they hadn't filed the earnings report. It's pure speculation. But as Bitewing lays out in this post, what are the factors that are playing the biggest role? 1, sales. And this is the very clear portion of things that he lays out. Nick does. He does a great job at this. If you want to see these still live, again, yeah, you're going to pay a little more potentially right now. There are some people increasing prices to account for potential worry from that aspect. There are people increasing prices because they're already being affected in that way of the stuff that they need to bring over that they know is going to happen no matter what and how soon some of this stuff is rescinded. And there's also people lowering it just to get stuff off the shelves, less storage, and just to get some sort of cash flow. And that sales model is directly playing into this. The publishers, he says, who rely on retail sales are going to hurt the most because the MSRP they think is going to drastically go up because you're selling your game wholesale to retailers and distributors at a discount normally, but now it's going to have to go up, and it's going to have to go up, it's going to have to go up, just like I covered with the Stonemaier breakdown from the previous video. If you want to know the exact fiduciary monetary minutia from the previous video, go check out the Stonemaier blog for this. So the other issue is if you're selling your game directly to the customers, you know, if you're doing the crowdfunding, there's less of the middleman. So there's less of the markup. There's less of that. So you're going to have to deal with the tariffs, but you may have less of the in-between, right? So, okay. And that's where other people, if you've got any international localization, like many of these larger companies do, they're not just hub-based in one area. They're not just producing in one area. They're not just, well, having merchandise or whatever else go along with it. They're going to do better, right? That's just obvious. Therein lies the trickle down with that. If you are more international, if you are more spread out, I said in my video that publishers have said about 70% of the global market is America, but that's not taking into account individual publishers on a case-by-case basis. So if yours is higher than that in terms of outside of the US, I mean, you're gonna be better off. And they put the number here in this post of being 40% or more of your sales outside the US, which is, you know, not an inconsiderable amount. He actually says they're only importing 40% into the US. So they actually feel pretty good that the majority is going international, which I would make the argument that many are not in that case. And this is the big differentiation that's going on, even with the Final Frontier situation, where they kind of sort of threw in some CMON jargon there, we'll say, because it's, you know, devolved. I saw it on several fronts on social media of a he said, she said, you shouldn't say this, you shouldn't do this, you know what, they did this, or they didn't want to do this fully, and burning bridges, and I'm not getting into that, right? But the ultimate issue that Final Frontier ran into, right, was cash flow. That is the most of the problems right now. Because unless you are literally getting hit with the tariffs as we freaking speak, it hasn't yet been a problem. That is not to say it is not imminent, but it has not been. And so the imminency of that does not triumph cash flow problems. And that's where Final Frontier very pointedly has the big issue. And that goes back to even what I said in the previous video, right? All the smarties in the comment section again saying, well, you can just store the games. Well, I mean, people are thinking about that. But you have things like rent and overhead and salaries and anything that's going to be on a returning continual basis eating away at the cash reserves or any sort of reserves that you have in the first place. And so that's where a lot of the layoffs come in if you can't pay on a repeated basis in that regard, which was the underdog situation. Now, Bitewing specifically points out that with their partnership with Allplay, as we've seen a couple of these umbrella situations, especially with Allplay, especially with like Asmodee, right, where they're not necessarily individually, personally having as much of the overhead. It's like the difference between like 30 and 40 years ago, if you will. If you look at the healthcare model system, right? Healthcare 30 or 40 years ago was independent physicians, PAs, things like that, that were assuming a lot of the overhead individually. Nowadays, the healthcare system, a lot of the big hospital systems have bought up, eaten, gobbled the individual providers and put them under the banner. Well, that gives them less reward potentially in terms of this, but then that also means they're not having as much of the worrying about insurance, worrying about payroll, worrying about staff managing, worrying about all those things that, say, like dentists are still individually doing because they're still individual practices and they all have to do their own thing in that regard and manage all of those different aspects. So if you have less of that, as he points out, if you have someone to help with distribution, well, they take a cut of sales and they take a cut of the charge, but they don't take as much as if you were trying to individually negotiate in that regard, just like the hospital doing a lot of the insurance and the billing and providing the ancillary support that otherwise you would probably be paying out of pocket at a much higher cost. That ties directly into the next point that I mentioned, right? That there will not be a right answer for everybody, because again, the other sort of Spider-Man meme thing going on right now in the comment section, and comparison wise, apples to oranges to bananas to kiwis to pears, is that some people are saying, well, I think all of these companies should do this. I got a couple messages even saying this is not fair in this way. I don't think this is right that this company is doing this, or that this country is being charged this and this one isn't, right? This is a publisher situation, folks. Some of these, especially as I mentioned in the video, size matters. Ooh, phrasing. But what I mean with that is that some of companies with larger cash reserves, larger cash flows, less retail distribution, more just established outside or localization internationally, are going to be able to eat this cost a little bit better than other places. It's not going to be equal and everybody doing the same thing. That's what Final Frontier had. They ate costs that maybe they shouldn't have when COVID and the whole shipping fiasco side of things that happened, right? Whereas other people asked for stuff. And it was this fine line about who's doing what. It's the same fine line now about who's doing what, trying to figure out what that looks like, including the aforementioned holding stock in China, hoping for this storm to pass, because maybe that drains their bank accounts a little bit slower than trying to bring it over. But where are you going to rob Peter and Paul from? As I mentioned in the previous video as well, the print and plays, the cards, the non-plastic junk, the non-super deluxeified things, this is 30 pounds to send each individual thing, because again, the cost and the declaration and then the subsequent 145% increase are just all going to be less. So they flat out say that because our stuff isn't to that degree, and with our positive localization, sharing distribution with Allplay, and everything else that we've talked about is more feasible. So we're bringing stuff over. We're not having an issue in that regard. But they also mentioned that they're taking a significant chunk of salary cut for themselves. He actually lays it out as $4.70 an hour, the current hours he's working. So where can you, as I just mentioned, rob Peter to pay Paul from in the first place? Subsequently, the other issue that gets tied into this, and this is the side tangent, but I'm going to put this out here and I'm going to save it for another video, but this is a big point. Kickstarter and GameFound don't care. They don't. It's the bottom line, right? And that ties into multiple projects running simultaneously without being fulfilled, because both of these companies care about getting their cut. GameFound Feast just had like 3 Flanix projects go up on that. Simon has the stores, the pre-orders, the retails, the crowdfunding upcomings, and Kickstarter kind of had this loosey-goosey rule that really they didn't actually apply to anyone and still don't. GameFound, I don't even know if they have a policy. I'm probably wrong. Maybe they do have a policy, but it's not really taking effect. At least, again, like I mentioned previously, that if you make more money or if you give more money to them in some way, shape, or form, the rules don't apply to you. That's the rule of our society right now, especially within our government, in addition. And for those of you with that last comment who are going, well, Chris, GameFound is protected actually by the stable pledge, because if the creator has to declare the cost of the products or their shipping more than 10% of the value after the crowdfunding's end, then you're allowed to ask for 100% refund, and the creator has to do that. Well, first, let's take that at face value, and then we'll get into the minutia here of just, not to get too sidetracked. If that happens, and you have a lot of people wanting a refund, a large number of that, well, what happens if they just delay and delay and delay and delay until they, don't have any money left to be able to pay those people back? Oh, cough, Mythic. And then your SOL, even if it was stable pledge. Now, here's the other tricky sticking point. They put out a blog post when this whole tariff thing was going up, and they said, well, and this is from the comments, this is from the blog post. Remember, this is a tax on top of stuff. This is not changing the cost of the product. This is not changing the cost of the shipping. Now, this is where it might get a little blurred. If companies try to include that into one of those, then you can have people refunding. But if you just say, we're going to ask you to pay extra, it doesn't factor into that. Now, this is the tricky part, though, because they also then said subsequently in another blog post just prior to me filming this that they're going to have a feature that you can add on a group of orders to add a percentage fee to the value of the product. So if you want to, and they specifically say not shipping or taxes. So if you have one creator wanting to add it as a separate thing, if you have other people wanting it to add to the value of the product, that could be very different, because again, the tariff is the tax as a percentage of the value. But if you're not going to make people do it that way, then again, this feature, this stable pledge, is practically worthless. And in case you're clicking F5, in case you're browsing on the internet urgently while I'm telling you this, most of the CMON ones aren't. Most of them. But DC United is. But again, that begs the question, is it going to be done in the way that will allow you to request the refund? Because if they do that, then you can guarantee a lot of people are going to do it. And if a lot of people do that and pull their money out, they're not going to be able to afford the other stuff. So how transparent are you going to be? GameFound, how much are you going to force this issue? But apart from that, it's kind of a crapshoot. You'd have to go back to your individual pages, because I guarantee prior to this, most of us have not really given this a whole lot of thought. But now, and how you're going to split it that way, oh boy, this could be very contentious. Final Frontier flat out said that they had to use funds from a campaign to finish another, to deal with other issues from other campaigns. And so if you have a dry spell in there, that's the domino effect. I'm not going to go as far as say Ponzi scheme, because that implies that you were doing it purposefully and almost maliciously. And I don't think that's the case with the vast majority that are doing that. But I'd argue that there's probably a ton of companies that you think may be doing that are doing it. But there's probably a few that you never would have thought they were doing that are also doing that. Because again, that in and of itself is not a bad thing, right? That's the whole Stonemeyer blog situation again. He's saying, I spend $100,000, I get the 25 to 40 back, and what do I do with that? I reinvest it. And well, that's actually from the first project, but I can reinvest it into the same one or another one. And so it's more blurring the lines in that regard, rather than just purposefully and deceitfully using it to fund stuff and not let people know. And obviously, this creates, as he says, a snowball of debt, unless you're lucky to strike it particularly rich with a good profit margin on a particular product. So take that for what you will. This is the most interesting line. And this a line that I can see people getting pissed off at. But if you take it for what it is, without judgment, I also see exactly what he's saying. Tariffs seem like a surefire way to test the stability of a small business. Ooh, right? And that's the other side of things that people are kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudging. And again, I said it in the previous video as well. What that is really saying is your business model built on foundations of stone or foundations of quicksand? Over deluxified situation is coming to fruition. We have jumped the shark in how much we think we can add to things, and it's coming back home to roost. And so in some of those ways, we're seeing the trickle down in not a positive way. And some of the comments are saying, you know what, this gets a little bit of a soft or even maybe a slightly harder reset on some of this stuff on crowdfunding, folks. I'm not opposed to it. I am not opposed to it. I love standees. I love cubes. I love great game and game mechanics. I do not need it blinged out. Rumble Nation is one of the favorite games in my collection. Flip 7 is a hell of a lot of fun. And you know what neither of those have? Well, take your pick. Metal coins, deluxe whatevers, plastic all over the place, boxes that are 3 times the size meant to just be delivered safely rather than utilizable. You know what? I can say screw it to a lot of that stuff. Are you willing to say screw it to a lot of that stuff to be able to actually keep your favorite companies going? Or hopefully that our favorite companies will do that in order to keep going in the first place. Because I've said that also about other crowdfunding projects, right? That fail or that struggle. When they come out with this first edition of just over the topness, right? I love you, but when I covered Seismic, that's exactly what I said for this. I said, it's great that you have a vision for a $200 game, but why not put a first edition out? My friend Devin is doing Montoons. He did the print and play last year. He's doing the hard physical copy now because it funded, because he got the money to do it, because now you can have the progression. But in this me first, everything is about what I want, I desire, and I crave, screw everything else mentality that we have, it has to be done my way or the freaking highway. And so I hope we start to see some scaling back in that, whether this is a direct cause of it or not. And here is the last element of things, as I alluded to earlier with the comments of the crowdfunding and the trickle down and the who should pay what, right? Because again, I said some people are doing it one way, some people are doing it the other way. Bitewing says here, well, US backers, you're going to pay an additional fee, just like the folks. And I heard you in the comments, the people from Euro saying, you know what, we're paying that. So US, you should have to pay tariffs. And I said, I don't have an argument, right? Like, this isn't on me. I'm not advocating for one way or the other. These are businesses that have to make this decision. You have to then vote with your wallet. If you like the way they're doing it, if you want to keep supporting them, if you don't like the way they're doing it and still want to keep supporting them because they're a good company, right? It's not this black or white situation that people want to make it out to be. I got several comments sent to me that were not happy about me or about it in general because they took it personally. And that's okay. But it's not a black and white issue with some of these decisions that are going along with all of this situation, because the ramifications are beyond probably what you and I can even see or think about at this point as well. Because again, this is people's livelihoods. There are people, names, and faces of real people behind this, more so than anything else. That is the most important thing to remember. Subsequently, going off of that though, he says our prices aren't changing on the crowdfunding. But, and this is the other reason I don't think crowdfunding is going to die. It's a very well illustrated point that he says, you know what? Because of that less middleman that crowdfunding still is, we're going to offer it at this price point. But you want it at retail? Remember that wink, wink, nudge, nudge that people always do, that I even have done many a time of saying, you know what, there's no reason for me to get this on crowdfunding because it's going to be like $20 less. at retail and you're not really giving me any incentive to get it on crowdfunding in the first place, well, now you might see a drastic flip of that and a changing of the script as a whole of retail just might be a lot higher. Again, support them at retail, pay more. And I don't think that's a bad thing either, because crowdfunding is still a gamble of whether or not you're going to like it. So it's better to wait sometimes and pay more, as people say all the time with the CMON situations, right? To use them, or the Awakened Realms, to say, you know what? If it's great, I will still be able to get it on the secondary market later for a mark up. And that is still okay. And consequently, is it risky still to back projects? Absolutely. It's never not been risky. I put out a freaking video in the last month of huge projects that raised millions of dollars combined that we still don't have games for. So yeah, it's still going to happen. But as I mentioned, as he talks about on this post, right? If you have cheaper projects with punchboard, little wood, it's a hell of a lot easier to compensate, to shift, to pivot than tons of custom plastic. Along with this, and again, I gave kudos for a couple projects already this year, like Onward from Skytier. They came to the table with a finished product. Most companies, especially the bigger ones nowadays, they're coming with a concept. They're coming with an idea. They're coming with some half-baked prototypes that are going to give you a smattering taste of what it may be. That's going to be a problem. Yes, there are exceptions to the rule. Leader Games is the exception, but that's an exception for a reason. Development takes longer. Overhead costs drain the funds. Final product might not be what you want it to be. Got to redo some stuff and have it be even longer. Higher risk of not reaching expectations in the same regard. Then if that doesn't happen, you don't sell the extra stuff that you have, and it leads down to that cash flow issue that we were talking about again. He subsequently goes on and says, yeah, well, I mean, proven companies, right? Everyone knows that. Tariff policy and statements. Know what it is. If this remains just like on crowdfunding campaigns up until this point, I have said, if you don't have a rule book, you should not be backing this. If you're not knowing what their tariff policy is, if you don't know what their VAT policy is, for all you Europe people, right? You know, if you don't know what that is, you shouldn't be backing it. If you don't know and it's not clearly enunciated, you shouldn't be backing it. Just the same, you shouldn't be doing it from a rule book standpoint. So how do we close this then, right? You support creators directly. You order from their stores, you do their crowdfunding, or you do anything in that regard. So there you go. That's what it is right now. Straight from the industry again. Me giving my commentary on it, but this is not me making stuff up. So there you go. Thoughts, comments, questions, concerns. Stay classy. Peace out. Patreon me up if you want more. See you later.